I have all sorts of thoughts on how to write a good book. I don't know if it's good advice, but I'll pass on what I think anyway, because I've written a fair number of them, over 20 or so. Anyway, what we're talking about here is business books. And really, it's important that you make sure that these things are more interesting than the average book. And that's easier said than done. There are millions of business books, and to be honest with you, a lot of them are really dull. And a lot of books, you can tell that really they shouldn't be books because actually you've got the idea within the first chapter and all the rest is case histories and this and that, which are maybe of interest but maybe not. So maybe that book shouldn't have been a book, it should have been a blog post or a short article somewhere. Now let's talk a little bit about editing. Good editing is absolutely crucial. Remember, we are writing not for ourselves, but we're writing for the edification of the reader. And that being the case, you want everything to be as short as possible. Brevity equals intelligence. And a lot of that is down to really good editing. So step number one is to be a brilliant self-editor. Now that is really difficult. So for every bunch of words that you want to say, for every moment when you want to waffle on and elaborate on a point, don't. The best thing to do is to make it as short as possible. So when you have finished your writing, or if it's a chunk or it could be the whole book, you've got to go through it again and think, how can this be misunderstood? How can this be made shorter? Now in this regard, a good editor is vital, because they can see the gaps in the argument, they can see if the pattern is wrong. But the trouble is these days, and particularly in publishing, is that very few people now have a long established career as an editor, and therefore you get bits of editing input, but not necessarily the full works. So you need to self-edit in a very intelligent and disciplined type of way. Now, one way to do this, if you haven't got, as it were, editing skills provided for you, is to ask your mates to take a look at it. Or you may even ask a peer, some kind of peer review, if you like, of your material to establish how good your book really is. And of course you may find out that it isn't really worth a book, or it's not that good, or just something as simple as, I didn't understand the point you were making there. But if you're going to do that, then deliberately choose a mixture of people, if you can, who are different from you, because it's really easy to just talk in an echo chamber. And if it's someone you know well, or someone who agrees with you on a certain topic, then you may just find, well, they just agree with you. And so what you're not getting is criticism or decent critique or editing. So if you can, try to choose people who would be or could be as critical as a potential reader might be. And bear in mind that you don't know who the reader is because you've never met them. And that's the whole point about writing a book. You sit at a desk and write your thing. It goes out into the wider world and you've got no idea who's going to read the thing. That's part of the thrill and fun of it, of course. But also it means, as ever, you write for the reader, do not write for yourself. Another point about writing a book, I suppose it's not a case of how to write a book, but it's a thing related to it. And that is, I would strongly recommend that you don't do it for the money. If you're doing it for the money, you're going to get a surprise because you'll probably earn nothing. Of course, there are one or two exceptions to that, but in the main, and particularly in the business market, you're very unlikely to have some huge, lucrative bestseller that allows you to retire in luxury. So you're much better off if you do it to prove a point that you feel strongly about, or it's on a subject to a particular audience that you feel that you can really help with your experience to pass that on through the written word. That would be a good reason for writing a book. Don't do it for the money. A final point I would make with regard to writing a book, and that is that if you're in any doubt about whether the book's going to be any good or whether you can really do it, I would say just don't do it. I mean, as the old saying goes, everyone has a book in them and it's precisely where it should stay.